Hey, I'm Tamara Kandaker, and you're listening to The Decibel from the Globe and Mail. So last July, in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd and at the height of the racial justice protests that broke out across the US and Canada, racism also became the topic of conversation in the corporate world. Talking about racial politics used to be taboo, but companies suddenly felt the pressure to say something. What were they doing to fight systemic racism and address the lack of representation of Black people among their employees and in their leadership? Many companies like Walmart Canada, McDonald's, Pepsi, Rogers signed on to something called the BlackNorth Initiative, which gave them a deadline of 2025 for diversifying their senior leadership and corporate boards. It's now been a year, and my colleagues at the Globe's Report on Business wanted to check out how much progress they've made.
And we felt that, look, if you have done absolutely nothing in 1 year, then what's to say this is not just forgotten about and you're not going to do anything in the next kind of 5 years. So we felt it was really important to kind of hold these companies accountable 1 year on, especially after they were very, very public about the way they committed to the pledge.
Vanmala Subramaniam is the Globe's capital markets reporter, and she's on the show today. You're listening to The Decibel. Van, hi. Thanks so much for coming back.
Hi, Tamara. Thanks for having me on the podcast again.
So let's talk about the BlackNorth Initiative. Let's start with how this thing got started and what is the problem that the BlackNorth Initiative is trying to solve?
Yeah, so the BlackNorth Initiative got started approximately a year ago, so the summer of 2020. And it really came about in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd. And for some reason, it appeared to be the turning point for corporations. And they started to think we might be having a diversity problem. Mm-hmm. So Wes Hall, he manages a financial advisory firm called Kingsdale Advisors. He decided, enough was enough. We have to hold corporations accountable when it comes to diversity goals. And so he decided to form this initiative that really placed tangible, achievable goals for companies to achieve within a certain time frame.
And so let's talk about what the goals of the BlackNorth Initiative actually are. If you sign up for the BlackNorth Initiative, what are you committing to as a company?
So you're committing to 7 specific goals. So one of the goals is to make sure that you have Black leaders in at least 3.5% of executive and board roles by 2025. So they still have 4 years left. And that 3.5% number corresponds to the average percentage of the Black population in Canada. Mm-hmm. There's another goal of a 5% hiring target for Black student interns. Mm-hmm. They also ask that companies invest at least 3% of corporate donations and scholarships in organizations or initiatives that would basically create opportunities specifically in the Black community and for Black people in Canada by 2025. So those are the numeric goals. Okay. There are also, broadly speaking, non-numeric goals that really speak towards the spirit of the pledge, which is to diversify your workforce. And so, for example, one of those non-numeric goals is ensuring no barriers exist to prevent Black employees from advancing. And some of the ways you can do that, they suggest, is implementing unconscious bias training, setting up diversity councils. The other really interesting goal, I think, is they want companies to start collecting data on race and ethnicity. And they say that that's really important because you, first of all, will know how white or non-white your workforce is. Mm-hmm. And it will help you develop and advance Black people within these organizations once you know the problem you have on your hands.
Okay. And so how many companies ended up signing up for the pledge?
The initiative launched last July, almost exactly a year ago. And when it launched, 209 companies signed up. And, Tamara, was some of the biggest companies that signed up. 3 of the 5 big banks, Rogers Communications, Air Canada, very prominent companies which employ a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And then over the course of the year, They increased that number to 473 companies. I would say this initiative is probably one of the most prominent diversity initiatives in corporate Canada, because you see some of the biggest oil and gas companies, power generation companies, all of them kind of counting themselves as so-called allies to this progressive cause.
And I understand that there have been some criticisms of the BlackNorth Initiative coming from activists who are accusing the people behind it of hypocrisy. And tell me a bit about that.
So Prem Watsa, he runs Fairfax Financial, which is an insurance holdings company. Fairfax is actually one of the largest insurance for the for-profit bail industry in the US. So critics of the BlackNorth Initiative, and they include Desmond Coles, an Toronto-based activist, the American Civil Liberties Union, they have basically called on Prem Watsa to either exit the bail insurance industry in the US, which they say is very predatory and impacts communities of color disproportionately, or, don't ally yourself with a cause that says that you're going to end anti-Black systemic racism. The other criticism of it, which is interesting, is that there are no other Black board members on the initiative besides Wes Hall himself.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all good context. So these companies did commit to a deadline of 2025. And why did you decide to do this check-in just a year into this?
We did that because we felt it was fair to assess companies after one full year of committing to the pledge. So there were companies, including the Globe and Mail, that signed on to the pledge, later on. The Globe signed on in November, but we didn't survey those companies. So we went to 209 companies.
You've been looking at the progress that these companies have made, and tell me what you've looked into and what you were able to find out.
We asked them a series of 18 questions. And, these questions were directly linked to the tangible goals that they committed to and the non-tangible goals, like creating committees and stuff that they committed to. And out of those 209 companies, 105 of them responded to us. We couldn't get in touch with 4 of those companies, so I wouldn't count them in. But that means a full 100 companies just didn't respond to us at all, or responded with one sentence saying, we decline to participate in your survey. So what we found is that 16 of the 105 companies increased the number of Black executives in their ranks. And some of those companies were CIBC, Bank of Montreal. That was the construction company Ellis Don that also did pretty well on their goals. We've also found that 15 of the 105 companies increased the number of Black employees overall. 26 of the 105 companies increased the number of Black board members, or they had already joined the initiative by surpassing their 3.5% target. So they were higher to begin with. They might not have added more Black board members over the course of the year. And so if you look at those numbers, 15, 16, 26, in the course of 1 year, yes, it is fair to say that there has been progress. Some companies are doing better. They are making an effort. But the overwhelming number of companies, the ones that declined to participate in the survey and the ones that responded to us and showed no progress, basically you can infer that they are struggling to meet their tangible goals. They have until 2025 to do it. But we just found that 1 year later, a lot of them had done very, very little.
Right. So 1 year later, not much progress, even after a lot of these companies very publicly and vocally signed on to this pledge last July.
Absolutely. There were a couple that I noticed took very bold stances in support of the Black Lives Matter movement last year. Coca-Cola was one of them. Adidas was the other. And they both signed the BlackNorth Pledge last summer. They're multinational companies that have Canadian entities. Yet both those companies declined to provide the Globe with information on, what they were actually doing to start meeting the goals in the pledge. The president and CEO of Chorus Entertainment, they own Global News. In his statement, he basically said he's going to promise that no barriers will exist in preventing the company's Black employees from advancing. But, when we went to Chorus and we asked them a series of 18 questions, they declined to provide any data on how many Black employees the company had and how many were promoted. So we just didn't know. And if you go on their website, you can see that there are no Black people on the company's board and at its executive level. It's not all white, but it's majority white, but there are no Black people on the company's board. So, to some extent, it begs the question of, you very publicly did sign up for this pledge and you got credit for signing up to this pledge. So, what have you done a year later to actually start to meet some of the goals outlined in the pledge?
In terms of the numeric goals, we haven't seen a lot of these companies making much progress, but how did they do in terms of the more intangible goals, like setting up diversity committees and diversity plans and things like that?
Yes, so that's a really good question and really important to point out that where companies were successful in the last 1 year was in intangible targets like setting up diversity committees, coming up with a strategic plan to figure out how to increase diversity at all ranks of the company. So we asked companies specific questions on, did you have, say, a diversity and inclusion committee before you signed the pledge? Did you have a diversity and inclusion committee after that? And, from all the companies that responded to us, only 18 said that they did not actually have a diversity committee in place either before or after the pledge. So the overwhelming number of companies did have a diversity and inclusion committee in place. And, they're using that committee to advance the tangible goals of actually hiring and elevating more Black employees.
That's really interesting. So why is it that companies have struggled with hiring more Black people or elevating Black employees into these executive or board level roles?
So there are a couple of answers to that. Data is a big problem. So the overwhelming number of companies we went to said that they basically did not track granular data on race and ethnicity. So under the Canada Employment Equity Act, most companies are obligated to track data on what they say are disadvantaged groups, and that is women, visible minorities, people with disabilities, and Indigenous people. They are not obligated to break that race data down by Black, South Asian, Chinese, or whatever it is. Now, the other thing was experts who help companies find diverse talent often said, and even Wes Hall told me this, that companies say that they just cannot find either Black or BIPOC employees to fit into certain roles. And what Wes Hall said to that, and even some of the other diversity consultants I talked to, is companies have almost a formula and a method of hiring where they continue to hire from the same pools and they use the same recruiters. So if you hire from the same pools, the same private schools, the same universities, the same recruiters who know the same people who grew up in the same neighborhoods, then you're going to only get one kind of demographic of applicants. And that is why you're struggling to find diverse employees.
Right. So I find it really interesting that the majority of these companies had an easier time meeting these intangible goals, like setting up diversity committees and councils and making plans for how they're going to improve the composition of the workforce. And I'm wondering why you think it's been easier, or like why they've been more successful at doing that. And also, what kind of impact did these diversity committees actually have?
Part of the problem with this, and, I was speaking to a couple of experts about this, part of the problem is that if you have a group of mostly underrepresented people, racial minorities, who are in either junior ranks or middle ranks of the company leading these diversity committees, oftentimes research has found that it makes no difference at all because senior leadership is really not on board with recommendations, or it gets put off, or nothing is really done. So that's why Wes Hall, he likes to call the BlackNorth Pledge a CEO pledge. And what he means by that is everything that is done, including the creation of the diversity committee or diversity plan or whatever, needs to be on the desk of the CEO. That the CEO needs to attend these meetings. The CEO needs to be part of these committees and needs to show their face at these events and, take it seriously in order for actual change to take place. Because diversity committees can just go on as diversity committees in the guise of doing something for diversity. But tangibly speaking, is the workforce getting more diverse? Not really, as we found.
Mm-hmm. There's one more thing that I read in your piece. I wonder if you can talk about that more and how much of a factor that is. And it's the fact that these terms on corporate boards are really long. And some companies say that that is part of what makes it hard to replace people. Is that true?
Yes. So I'll give you an example actually to explain this point better. I reached out to the cannabis company, Canopy Growth. I asked them, what are you doing? 7 members of their board are white. What are you doing to kind of improve the diversity quota here? Because you did sign on to the BlackNorth Initiative. And they responded saying that they're in the process of developing strategies to increase this representation. But part of the problem is that board members have fixed terms and it's not as simple in company law as just going up to a board member and telling them, hey, you got to leave. You can't be here anymore because, it doesn't meet our diversity stats. These things take time and you have to have a vote. So that was one of the pieces of feedback we got from quite a few companies.
I am wondering, though, how much this is just about recruitment. Is part of the problem that these companies have trouble retaining Black employees?
Part of the problem, too, and actually I'm quoting Wes Hall here, is that he says that when you just have one Black board member, for instance, on a board, it's often a very lonely place to be. His exact phrase, and I'm reading from, my interview notes with him, is he said, why would I, as a Black man, want to subject myself to that environment where every single person around that table, which I could run circles around, by the way, does not look like me and wants me to prove myself like I'm some performing clown. So that's kind of the feeling when you're alone in a space that is predominantly white, even if it's at the top. And to some extent, Wes Hall believes that it discourages people from staying in these positions. It really affects the retention of Black people to corporate levels, to senior corporate levels. So that's kind of why he's saying, don't tokenize this problem. Don't think you're doing people of color a favor by bringing them into an organization at a high level. Think that this is going to actually improve your organization. It's going to add to diversity of thought within the room. It's going to, add to your discussion and, various people from various backgrounds are going to bring in different experiences. And that's really how companies should be thinking about it as opposed to just it being a checkbox.
Right. So we're just a year into this, and I wonder what your sense is of whether these companies are going to be able to meet this goal by 2025. Does the BlackNorth Initiative have a plan for that? How do they hold these companies accountable?
The BlackNorth Initiative themselves had trouble getting companies to give them feedback on, the progress of their goals. So they too did a survey between November and June 2021. And, they've published their results too. And they reached out to all the companies that had signed up to the pledge, over time. And that was over 400 companies. And they only got 182 responses. So it does seem that some companies just don't want to respond at all. And, Wes Hall told me, why should they be afraid? This is not a naming and shaming exercise. If you have not done anything for 1 year on diversity, then come to us for help. Ask us hey, how do we find more Black talent? Is there anyone you can recommend? We are there to help you. And on the question of whether they're going to achieve their goals by 2025, I think it's really hard to tell. And I think it varies according to company. I saw some companies or some institutions like Sheridan College, for example, they made huge strides in over a year, making sure they had more Black people at the executive and board levels. And, other companies just didn't do much. So I think it's hard to tell. But Wes Hall believes that the pace of change is a little bit too slow now, and he would like to see that pick up.
Okay, Van, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tamara.
And that's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandaker. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. David Crosby edits the show. Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thank you so much to Vanmala Subramaniam. You can find her on Twitter at VanmalaS. If you want to reach us, we're at the Decibel at globeandmail.com, and I'm on Twitter at Anima_TK. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.